Good morning, everybody, and welcome into a new episode of Capitol View, a webcast brought to you by the Daily Journal and djournal.com. Coming to you normally every Monday. We had some technical issues yesterday, so that's why we're coming to you a day late here with Capitol View. Obviously, we've got the issues worked out and hope they remain worked out for the rest of this program. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking with Bobby Harrison, our Capitol Bureau Chief, about what's going on in Jackson with the state legislature and all of that good stuff. So, Bobby, how you doing?
All right, Brad, how you doing?
Doing well, Bobby. It's snack day here at the Journal. I wish you were here.
I'm sorry I'm missing that. But the governor's having his annual Christmas party tonight, so there'll be some good eats there too.
Oh, good, Bobby. Well, hope you enjoy yourself. Let's talk a little bit about something less fun than snack day and whatnot and parties. November, another bad month for state revenue collections, wasn't it, Bobby? Worse than we've even been seeing lately.
Yeah, it was a bad month. Corporate income tax was state didn't collect any corporate income tax. I didn't know that was possible, but they collected zilch for 2 months in a row, actually. And sales tax was down. Income tax was down. You know, those three taxes are the three largest sources of revenue for the state. And when they're all down together, it makes for a bad month. And I believe, Brad, I wrote that story more than a week ago. I believe the revenue collections for the year are down year over year, and that's not a good sign.
Yeah, they're down 4.5% year over year. All three sources of revenue, as you mentioned: personal income tax, corporate income tax, and sales tax. And this in November, it was down 8.8%, or 35.2 million. Below the official estimate. Now, Bobby, tell people a little bit about the estimate they made back in the spring.
Well, the estimate is important because the estimate provides the amount of money that the legislature believes it will have available to budget during the next budget year. You remember when the legislature meets this January, they'll be working on a budget to start on July 1st. So they're budgeting way ahead, and they're also having to depend on revenue collections way ahead. So if these revenue collections don't meet the estimate during the year, the governor has to make budget cuts or dip into reserve funds, or the legislature has to make cuts, so or find other sources of revenue. And so that's so the fact that they're not meeting the estimate is important, but they're not far from the estimate, and the governor's already made $56 million in cuts this year. So right now that looks like they may be to slide through, depends on what happens the rest of the budget year. They'll be in session in less than a month to address those issues.
Right, and of course, I mean, you do have some looking for some rays of sunshine here. We do have some additional sources of revenue, like Attorney General Jim Hood with some lawsuit settlements, stuff like that.
Right, and then you have also what's really saving the budget to a large extent are those types of sources of revenue. The lawsuit settlements, plus, you remember we talked about it so much, probably more than most people want to hear, but the transfer bill that they did, the controversial budget transfer bill they did at the end of the last session, where they took money, fees and assessments to go to fund particular programs, and instead put that money in the general fund, so it would be available for just general budgeting. And that is providing the state a large additional source of revenue that's kind of is a reason they're not in a deeper budget hole right now.
And speaking of the Budget Transparency and Simplification Act, if there's
ever a law that did not meet its title, that was it, Brad.
Well, and there are about $30 million still in funds that are frozen due to some of opinions by Attorney General Jim Hood. Kind of explain best you can. It's kind of an involved deal, I guess, why this money is frozen.
Yeah, the Lieutenant Governor and Republican Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, who is one of the architects of this law, and Democratic Attorney General Jim Hood have kind of been going back and forth on it. And I actually had an interview with Tate Reeves yesterday, and he conceded, he in the past, he hadn't really conceded that there was money frozen, but he conceded yesterday there's money frozen. But the good thing is this law has actually, there's $30 million. He said roughly $30 million, which is what the state budget folks, financial folks say is frozen. And he conceded that point. But he said that an important point is the law is there were more of those funds out there than they originally thought when they passed the bill at the end of last session. So while there's $30 million that they can get to by rewriting some laws during the 2017 session, which starts in January, the law is actually generated or put in the general fund about the amount of money they anticipated, which is about roughly $130 million. So so what he was saying is they're going to have kind of a $30 million bonanza during the 2017 session, which is one ray of light in what has been a difficult budget time over a couple of years for the legislature and for the state.
So do we expect this to be able to get fixed with this next session, Bobby? Get this $30 million freed up fairly easily?
Right. I mean, what happened was the Attorney General said that the law as it was written did not. The language in the law was not adequate to transfer that money from the special funds to the general fund in a real simplified version, and so that money's just kind of in limbo. And when the session begins, they can sort of tweak that law and get them, and that those funds will be available. And it's important to note those are one-time money. So the Lieutenant Governor said, they'll be available to appropriate during the 2017 session, but they probably will try not to appropriate them for recurring expenses. Instead, they might have, if there's some deficits that they have to address, they might spend them there or for capital expenses or for something like that.
And you mentioned you had an interview yesterday with Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves. Any other ground that y'all covered that's notable? I'm assuming you're working on a story based off of that.
Yeah, well, working on legislative advances. He's one of several people I'm talking to, but we covered a lot of ground. He was kind to give me about 30 minutes, and we talked about rewrite the education formula, which is going to be a hot topic during the 2017 session. And he stresses that from his perspective, there's no malice in there. Some people think they're trying to spend less money in education. He says that's not the intent. They want to get more money in the classroom, more money for special education, and more money based on student needs. And he says, I asked him about school choice. He said they've done a lot in the past couple of years in that area, and they need to kind of see how that stuff works and maybe tweak that some, but they don't look to its any large expansion of school choice. We talked about taxes, where he also said that he didn't foresee any major additional tax cuts during the upcoming session, but if people were interested in not expanding, but in speeding up the enactment of his tax bill that he was behind last year, the largest tax cut in state history, which went to corporations and the personal income tax. On personal income tax, he would be interested in talking to them about that. But another key thing that I thought he didn't endorse, he said there'd be more discussions about additional money for infrastructure improvements, but he did not take a stance in favor of additional tax increases for that issue. And another issue, I asked him if he had changed his opinion and was ready to try to pass legislation to change the state flag without a state referendum. Yeah, he just shook his head no. That was his shortest answer.
I got you. Well, the new legislative session starts 2 weeks from today. That's January the 3rd. And just a programming note, we will not be here next week. No Capitol View next week. Bobby and I will both be off for the holidays. But we'll be back the following Monday, which will be January the 2nd, the day before the new session begins. So at that point, Bobby will go a little more in depth on what to expect, some of the big issues that we think will crop up during the session, Bobby. And so looking forward to that. And again, it's last year we had the extra long session because it was an election year, but normally it's a 90-day session, right?
That's right. I can't remember. I hadn't really looked at the calendar, but it'll probably be over in late March or perhaps early April. But it goes into April. It'll be very early April.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, So we'll be back in 2 weeks on that Monday. Hopefully, we won't have any issues to keep us from broadcasting that Monday the 2nd. We'll take a really in-depth look at what to expect for the next legislative session. And thank you all for tuning in here to Capitol View. Bobby, you can follow him on Twitter at BobbyHarrison9. Find all his stories in the Daily Journal and at djournal.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brad Locke. So until 2 weeks from now, I guess, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you're celebrating this holiday season. We hope it's a good one for you. Bobby, Merry Christmas to you, sir.
Yes, sir. You too.
All right. Until next time, I'm Brad Locke for Bobby Harrison. Have a good one.